Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It, a podcast to help you fix your marriage. I'm Shai Lewis. I'm here with Nina Rosner. Our mission is to help you, Christian married man or woman, navigate conflict and build connection so you can have a thriving marriage. All right, so today we are talking about a lack of consistency in marriage as part of our Lack of Respect series. So as you guys know, our goal here is to help you with your language in sticky situations where you're just at a loss for words. And speaking of words, we know that the Word of God tells us that we must let our yes be our yes and our no be our no. But as simple as that sounds, it can be difficult when that doesn't happen in marriage. We often break our promises, we overcommit, we underestimate the work involved when we make a commitment, and then that tends to erode the respect in the relationship. So we want to talk about that today and help our listeners come away with some tips to avoid this trap. But before we do, I want to direct our listeners to our website, greaterimpactwives.org. That's where you can find a free PDF called 5 Tools for How to Stop Walking on Eggshells. We also have a free marriage assessment for you to check out so you can evaluate where things are and reach out to us if you need more help. All right, so welcome, Nina. I am excited to talk about this with you today.
Well, I am too. I love the topic of consistency, and it matters a lot in building a healthy relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was listening to a couples therapist, and he said that that's actually the number one reason that couples lose respect for each other is because there's just a lack of follow through. One spouse will, agree to a thing. They'll say, "Okay, I'll work on this," and then there's no change. Nothing happens, and then that gets interpreted as, well, you don't care, or you haven't really paid attention to my needs. And what comes to mind is that quote, that Maya Angelou wrote: when people show you who they are, you believe them. And so we start to believe people based on what they do and not what they say. And that can either go well or not. So I don't know. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, as somebody who's paved the road to hell with good intentions, also, my heart kind of goes out for people that are inconsistent. I struggle with that personally, not so much in relationships, but in tasks and project management and stuff. That's the organizational piece of that and follow through with projects in business. That's a tough area for me. And to your point, whether it's business or relationships interpersonally, it affects whether people trust you or not. So there's a huge issue with that. So as much as I'd like to, make excuses for all of us that aren't great at this, yeah, no, that like it's a maturity thing, and we all need to level up in this space because otherwise, to not damages trust.
Yeah, it's definitely true. All of us do this. And a lot of times it is, we're well intentioned. We mean well, and it can feel like there's malice behind it, but oftentimes, I would say even most of the time, it's really just a blind spot or just something that it hasn't been brought to our attention. And an example of this can be like, okay, I know for me, when I have made a commitment to not engage, which is a boundary, when I'm emotional, I'll find myself doing that very thing unintentionally. And I get so upset because it's like I know better, but that gap between knowing and doing, and even
Mhm.
committing and doing, is still there. And so I think it's important for us to make note of the fact that when we're on the receiving end of it, although it can feel malicious, oftentimes it's just, like you said, just a lack of awareness, a lack of character. It's really unintentional at times.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons God tells us to have grace for other people. And at the same time, I know from my own experience when somebody tells me, look, when you don't follow through on your commitment to X, Y, and Z, it causes me stress. Or like I've got a deliverable that I'm late on right now.
Mhm.
And I I know I'm causing somebody stress because they have to wait for it. And when I have that awareness, then I'm motivated to do something about it and do better. So I think there's a process where, and I shouldn't need that. Like, hello, I should be adult enough to not have to have somebody say, hey, it bothers me that you XYZ'd, but I'm so glad that people do that. And then I can fix it and make it better. Um, and it's been a thing I've been working on for a long time. And I'm not like this in every single space, but there are a few spaces where, I want to grow up. And it helps me when somebody confronts me with that. Because
Mhm.
otherwise I don't, it's sad, but I don't have a reason. Isn't that awful? Like I don't have a reason. I made a commitment to you, but I don't have a reason to keep it. Like that's terrible. But when somebody tells me, well, it causes me stress when I have to wait on you, and you say it's going to be there Tuesday and it's Friday and I don't have it, it's like, oh, yeah. So I am so sorry. You're absolutely right. I didn't keep my word. And while I want grace around that, I also understand that, making the mistake is what motivates me to not do that again. And I think that's not that uncommon. I think we need to, well, get bit, to discover the dog bites. We can know it intellectually, but until we know it through experience, sometimes it takes that, and that's not wisdom, by the way. That's the rod on the fool's back, and that's me in this space right now. But we also have to recognize that we want to be wiser than that. I don't want to be this person, and
Mhm.
the person that I'm doing this to doesn't want me to be this person.
Mhm.
And so if I want the relationship to be good, I need to level up. And that's my responsibility. It's not their job to babysit me in that space. So, or any other for that matter. Right? Hello, let's be adults. Start here, Nina. Oh,
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing you said, when you said you like for people to hold you accountable, and in the phrasing that you used, I'd like to just highlight that. You said it makes me stressed when you don't do XYZ. I think that that is a very productive way versus you never or you always or
mhm.
like it completely puts the focus on the effect on you that it's having this behavior. Can you maybe just touch on like how that's or why that's important when you're holding someone accountable? Because that can make or break how things go as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think the assumption here is that I've got a healthy relationship with this person, which I do. So they're able to say to me because they know that I'm not going to lose my mind and get defensive. They know I'm going to take responsibility for my screw up. They're able to say, when you do A, it makes me feel B, or when I feel this way because you didn't keep your word. They know they can trust me with that. Um, and so there's a depth of relationship there already that provides safety for that. And for me to be able to, go, you know what, you're right. You know, I'll be honest, I haven't always been that person. I would get defensive if somebody called me on a mistake I made, even if they were right. Like I didn't want to know. I can remember being 19 years old working with a production manager, and I'd screwed up the programming for the radio station, and he calls me on it, and I'm like, no, it's fine. I'm arguing with this guy that he's like, no, it's right here, it's not fine. I'm like, it's fine. And I turned and I walked away, and I should have got fired for that or something, but I was a
Mhm.
boss's daughter, so nobody did anything except fix the problem. And I thought
Mhm.
about it later. I was like, what was that in me that knew it was false and basically lied, you know, because I couldn't handle the truth? Well, that's pride. So the Lord's done a huge work in me in that space. Like it costs me nothing for people to tell me, hey, you screwed this up or this is wrong. Like I want to know that. And I
Mhm.
value people that will actually do that with me. That I mean, that's makes them more trustworthy to me to
Mhm.
interact with them in that level. And I think, you know, when you look at a marriage, if you don't have that, you know, you're missing a basic friendship component, because all my friends and most of my ministry people that work for me even have said to me, hey, you know, like if we've been at this like 20 years, you're going to mess up something at some point, right? People need to be able to come to you and tell you that. If you're married, like
Yeah.
that's even more important. And that includes parenting kids too, right?
Yeah.
Like we've got to
Mhm.
be safe like that and own our stuff. And to not is just pride, which is devil's playground.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about people pleasing and what that looks like when there's a lack of follow through. So when I think of people pleasing, I think of when we say yes to something and we really don't want to say yes, but we say yes to avoid being uncomfortable and disappointing the person, or even conflict arising out of saying no. Um, and then because of how we really feel, we end up maybe not doing it or doing it later than we said, or, it just, the truth always comes out eventually. So it just was a bad idea to begin with. Can you
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit around people pleasing and follow through?
Well, I think you summarized it really,
Yeah,
really well. Like, we don't show up, we don't want to do this thing, so we don't do it
we
well.
don't do it. Mhm.
Yeah. Like, oh my goodness. I used to do that. And I would have almost a visceral physical response to listening to myself agree to do something I knew I shouldn't be doing. Didn't have time, didn't have energy, wasn't my gift. Like, and I just don't do that anymore. And yeah, it upsets people sometimes, but you know what? I can't live with it. I don't have the energy that is, that greasy, slimy, nasty feeling of betraying oneself at that level is just, ugh. And I think it was Lisa Tierquist in one of her
Mhm.
books talked about stealing somebody else's blessing. Like, oh, the best, yes, that's what it was. Yeah, she talked about you never want to do something just because you can. You want to do what you're called to do. And that was just so freeing because there's a lot of really capable people out there. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. You might steal a blessing from somebody else. So I love that model of leadership as well. And the more hands you get together, the lighter the work is for everybody. So, and the more people feel involved. So I think that applies to family and everything else. But at the core of it is, I think I need to make everybody happy, which honestly is it's pride, it's people pleasing, but it's also pride. That's the other
Right.
side of it's the insecurity side of that coin. And so we want to stop doing that as hard as it is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Another thing you mentioned earlier is sometimes we think we're somebody that we're not, or we think we're in a place where we're not, or we're not yet. Like there's a lack of development that exists. And ultimately, you just, like you said, you haven't really looked at your limitations, your energy level, your capacity, and you're just not really self-aware at all. And I think that also contributes to our lack of follow through as well, because we think, oh, I can, I can, I can, and we really can't.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes that I can is an I should. I should be able to do this,
Wow,
right?
yeah,
Ah, so we'll say yes to stuff because we think we should be able to do it, and then we're like, I really can't handle this right now. Right? It's too much.
yeah,
Yeah.
too much. And it's humbling when you get to that place where you realize you can't do all the things. You can't be everything to everyone. But once you start putting boundaries in place and letting your yes be your yes and your no be your no, you're actually much more pleasant to be around.
Yeah.
Your yes means more when you
Mhm.
have a strong no. And so, all right. One thing I think that would help if we want to become more consistent, we want to have a better follow through, is asking for help. A lot of times, when we get to a place where we realize we can't do it all, another step is, well, how do I get the thing done, that I know that I can't do? And sometimes that's just raising your hand and saying, I need help. Or it might look like, you know, I might need more time to get this thing done. I might need more flexibility to get this thing done, and being willing to ask for just that. Um, or it could be something like, I can do this partially, but not all of it. Like, there's just so many ways that we can work around and be creative around making commitments, but involving boundaries. Can you speak to that, and what your thoughts are around maybe asking for help and being more flexible?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of asking for help. Um, and I think if we let God be in charge of our time and how we choose to spend it, we'll do that more often because people love to help. I mean, for the most part, the mature people out there really, really want to give, want to serve. And so there's an opportunity there. And if we're hogging all the stuff, like people just feel like, oh, why do you have me around? What am I here for? And when you're in the business of raising kids, let's just be honest, teenagers don't like to help. Like overall, they're like chores. But the data's in on that. The more chores, the more responsibility that kids have at every age, the healthier they are, the more likely they are to take ownership over all sorts of things. And I mean, I see that all over the place, and it's a huge deal. We're living in a time where people just haven't had to do, like, not everybody has a farm and has to go grow their food. Hello, you know, there's work involved in that. And so we're living in an age where there's not as many chores, there's not as much difficulty. And we're seeing our kids mature later and later. Um, it's one of the reasons I'm grateful for Boy Scouts. Both of my sons went through that program and ended up eagling, and it's work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of fun too, but there's a ton of work involved in service projects and big things they have to go do and figure out on their own. And it made men out of them. Um,
Mm.
my oldest son, he's 29 now. He's been married 9 years or something, and he's got two kids. He's got one that's going to be 4, and the other's 2. So they did everything young, and they're doing great. But he doesn't need me, and that's awesome. That's really, we help each. Like, I've asked him for help with different things, and he's always there to help me. And he's asked me for help with different things. So we have this adult relationship now, which is just wonderful. I really, really like it. Same thing with his brother. You've got um, mature people that you're interacting with, and why are they mature? Well, because you didn't do everything for them. Like, that home is the safest place for kids to fail, so they've got to be given those opportunities to do things and do them poorly and have them go badly, so that they can make the mistakes when they're here, because it's not as expensive or dangerous, and it doesn't matter as much as when you're out in the real world. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's good. So ask for help, be honest about your limitations. And I think the last important thing, if you're looking at becoming more consistent, is making out a plan for yourself and maybe checking in. Have somebody hold you accountable. Be willing to check in with people. We have a coaching program here, and every single time there is a session, we check in at the very beginning and we talk about wins and what went well. And that's a great way to keep ourselves accountable. So, yeah, I think, we've talked about a few things today that I think would help you if you're willing to do the work and be open and Yeah, hopefully it was helpful to you. So, the next segment we want to jump into before we wrap up is the question of the day. And this is where we pull um, comments or questions from our course members, coaching, our coaching, our coachees.
Mhm.
And we share them here anonymously so that we can all learn. So, Nina, one client writes, you teach men and women that we have different needs when it comes to bonding and oxytocin. Can you give an example of how to bond through solving problems, providing results, overcoming challenges when you've been in conflict? It seems to me that the only way to resolve our conflict is by talking, but my spouse has a tendency to pretend like nothing happened after an argument.
Mhm. Yeah. So there's a couple of things in that. Um, we'll deal with the hormone thing first. So the primary hormone for women is oxytocin for sure, and men have some of that as well. We release that through eye contact, a 6-second kiss, or a 22-second hug. And so you engage in those things, and you're releasing oxytocin. And then, of course, sex will do that. But men also bond more frequently through a hormone called vasopressin, which is there when we've conquered the hill, we've solved the problem. And women, we don't ask men for help. So we're talking in our podcast today about asking for help, and it matters to do this, because most men want to be helpful. They want to have use, in their families, and so one of the things that we can do is we can ask them for help, and that we can bring the problem to them for them to solve, and it builds their identity as a provider, as a person that takes care of others and protects. And then it also releases that hormone, which then causes them to feel bonded to their spouse or whoever asked them for help. So let's say that you have a conflict over, I'm just going to make this up, and it's going to be weird because it's stuff that we deal with, which involves turkeys right now. So we have a poultry farm, and we've got it's not big. There's, some birds out here, and they need some equipment to do nesting and to have babies this spring. And so, we've been talking about what are we going to do and all of that. And so part of my job has been to bring information to the table, and then say, what do you think? How would we do this? And what's really cool is there's a solving of the problem because we don't have the setup finished. Like, they can start laying eggs, but they have no place to put them right now. So we have to figure that out and create the space. And we've talked through different options, but it's a bonding activity and it's also one of the things that we stress in the marriage intensive, which is to do new. So we're new at raising turkeys. We have not had any babies yet. We hope to be successful at that, but we're navigating this new thing together and trying to figure out what does that look like. So it could be a hobby that you want to take up. It could be, how do we redecorate the bathroom? How do we fix the front porch, in this place over here? And the advice I have for women is you present your husband with the problem. You say to him, hey, can I get your advice about something? And he'll say, sure, because who doesn't like to give advice, right? So he'll say, sure. And you take him out and you show him the front porch where there's a big old hole in the floor. And you say, what do you think? Like, how should we approach dealing with this? And you listen, and then you guys strategize on what to do next with that. So conflict was also brought up in the question, what do you do when they'll have a conflict and then act like nothing happened? Well, there's a whole lot going on in there. And so that's a pretty vague thing to address in a podcast answer. But my guess is that there's some sort of something that's not resolved, or there's just an energy release that needed to happen. But if problems aren't getting solved, then that's a thing to take a look at. And you don't usually do that through talking. In terms of, let's talk about the problem. You don't talk about the front porch. You go outside and you look at it. and you stand there with, so that he can say, well, this beam right over here, and then these boards over here need to be pulled up. There's more actual tactile something there that's going on, where something can actually be done, and then you figure out from there, what do we need to do. So solving problems together is a skill that comes after you're able to connect and after you've been able to be friends, because if you can't do those things, you're not going to be good at solving problems together. So that's like high level connection stuff. It's the end. Being good at solving problems is the end result of a good solid friendship where there's trust in the relationship and you've got commitment. So that's an outcome that we all want to see, and it gets easier when you have those other things. That's just how it works.
Wow, that's so good. And I would bet most women don't realize that there's a lot of steps before you get to the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think if you're willing to do it and be patient and of course allow the Lord in those moments, it's definitely achievable. So, all
Mm-hmm. And
right.
most of the time, we focus on the problem, and we talk
Mhm.
about the problems
Mhm.
instead of focusing on adding good things to a relationship, being trustworthy, being a friend, working on those things. And when we spend all our energy talking about the problems, they're not going to get solved, because they're the ability to do that well is the outpouring of laying the groundwork and the positive foundation of the good relationship in the first place. So when you have cycles of non-solvable problems, that's a symptom of the relationship not being in a great place. So it's a different way, to your point, it's a different way of looking at things that would be useful if we all recognized.
Yeah, yeah, we could maybe reverse that cycle. So okay, well, thank you for that. So what will you do with the information you have today? We invite you to go to our website. Also, check out these episodes on our channel about how to resolve conflict and show up as your best self. We thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time.